So yeah, I am Rebecca Balcárcel, and the pronunciation is, it's like the ball in the car, and you're like Balcárcel. And I actually have an audio file on my website for folks who care to see me say that same thing again about the Balcárcel. So I teach community college and I teach dual credit, which means I teach juniors and seniors in high school, a college class, as well as the community college students. And of course, I'm the author of The Other Half of Happy. Since a lot of you have already read the book, I'll skip the little, like this book is about kind of thing. And I want to show you some things about my family and refer to some themes in the book that you might want to bring up with your students. And then I want to get to questions, which are really my favorite part. So I'll just start sharing my screen here as we practiced earlier. So I should be good at this now. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is, of course, the cover and my dad playing the guitar. And as you know, the guitar figures prominently in the book and, you know, becomes a symbol of Quijana's heritage. And she wants to adopt the heritage, but at the same time, she is reluctant to, I guess she feels uncomfortable speaking Spanish. She's in the hyphen and she's not sure how to navigate that. I'd say she's caught between assimilation and heritage. Like that is her struggle. And the guitar is a major symbol there of her dad wanting her to play music that he's familiar with and from his side, his Guatemalan, you know, the fact that he's Guatemalan, and she wants to play her own music. And he's not sure why she doesn't want to play his music too, and why is she rejecting him and his heritage. So heritage, assimilation, definitely some themes. The sea turtle reminds me of the science thread of the book, which is a little bit smaller thread, but one of the grandmother, as a lot of you know, does look to nature and science for life lessons. And that is one of the ways that Quijana actually learns more wisdom. This is my parents, and that little smiling, laughing girl is me. So the black and white picture is my parents in 1966. This is their first date, and it was to a lake in Guatemala. Their story is very sweet. My mom went in the Peace Corps, met my dad in Guatemala, and you know, they fell in love across languages and across the Catholic Protestant divide. And in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm an embodiment of the fact that opposites can reconcile. But so that's them. And then a little later in the 70s with me. And I'll say that when my dad immigrated, biracial marriage had just become legal. The Loving decision from the Supreme Court in 1967, I want to say, had just come through. And of course, it was mostly aimed at Black and white marriages. But I'm kind of glad my parents married in 1968, so that wasn't a question. But it is kind of stunning to me how recent that was. This is my tia with a tortilla there, and then my abuela. And of course, if you've read the book, you know that the tia in the book is very much the representation of Guatemalan culture for Quijana, because she isn't really connected to the culture. I mean, her father is one connection, but she's not immersed in the food and just the way people talk. Switching between Spanish and English, like bicycle speeds, Quijana says. This is my real tia, and in real life she was, and her household was the place where I learned about Guatemalan culture and where I did learn to make a tortilla. And so I did put a lot of autobiography in the book. And there's my abuela, who is, of course, an important figure, especially at the end. So I have a 7th grade English teacher here on the screen. I am still in touch with her, and she actually came to the book signing. And she changed my life. She showed me how books can be transporting and healing, and that I could actually look deeper in a book. I mean, I had been a big reader, but she talked about symbolism, and she talked about plot structure. And I mean, she also reminded me about nouns and verbs and where to put commas. And she'll still remind me about those things even now. But I think, as teachers, we never should forget how big an impact we can have and how the ripples go out. And she did not know how important she was to me until I contacted her in adult life. And now she's in the book because the portable classroom where they have an English class in the portable is also from life. Her class was in a portable here in Texas, and she is just a ball of energy. And I modeled the teacher on her. Another picture here is me at my prom. And the man with me there, the young man, is my gay best friend. And you probably recall that Jaden is an important person for Quijana. She has a crush on him, and it turns out that he's gay, and it occurs to her as she starts observing him that he is, and that this romance is not going to go where she thought. And that's another theme to pick up on for students, I think. Gay characters in books and how they're represented. I actually had a sensitivity reader read this book, that is Chronicle hired one, and they looked at a lot of different aspects. Of course, the Latino aspect. There's a Black character in the book too, Zuri, and also the gay character. And she wanted to make sure that I was portraying him, as a full human being. But I was lucky because I had him read the book. And so he was able to tell me that he felt like it was pretty authentic. And the character Jaden is based on my real friend. His name was Daryl in real life. And the book is actually dedicated to him. And sadly, he passed in 2015. So he didn't actually read the final version of the book, but he knew the meat of it, and he saw an early version and gave his blessing. And then the other picture's me, of course. And this is my family now. It's missing one of my sons. I have 3 sons, but my parents and I, and my twins there are on the autism spectrum. And so that helped me write the little brother character, Memito, who is, in the book, they're not sure what he has. And I took that from life as well. I noticed that one of our instructors tonight here is a special education person. And, we were involved with the special ed pre-K program here. And that was great, but like they had a therapist for speech, but they wouldn't talk. So her job was really hard. But I took my experience as a mother of special needs twins to inform my writing of Memito, the little brother character. So, okay, let's see. I think the next slide. One thing I tell students, whether it's younger folks or my college students, is how important revision is. And of course they think whatever they wrote is great, first time through. But I show them this picture of a lot of drafts. It's not even all the drafts that this book went through. And it started out a lot shorter. It even started out as a pile of poems because my training was in poetry. And so I converted the poems into chapters. and made it into fiction. But it took a lot of rewriting, a huge amount of rewriting. And I probably wrote the entire book about 7 times, top to bottom, first page to last, trying to make it better and better, of course. And I usually show students this Workspace. It's not really unusual, but people seem to like to see your Workspace. And I tell students that the first draft was 25,000 words because, of course, it's more than double that now. And I want them to realize how much work comes after that initial draft. Okay, so how long did this book take me? 6 years. That's my cat. And it wasn't like I was writing every single day for 6 years, but I was going to critique groups, I was rewriting little sections, I was composing new sections, and then I was getting an agent and rewriting, and then I was, when the book sold, then I rewrote with the editor as well, and then there was the copy editor and the proofreader and the sensitivity reader, and so 6 years later, we actually have the book. And the cat belonged to my friend Daryl, to whom the book is dedicated. And when he passed, I inherited this lovely Zoe. Little side note. Oh, yes, okay, right. So I'm gonna let you all ask questions. This young lady is the audiobook actress who did the audiobook, and Ariana Cordero, and she did a beautiful job. I actually haven't listened to the whole thing, but I've listened to most of it, and she does a great job. So yeah, and oh yes, and I want to show you one more thing before we go to questions. I do have a YouTube channel, about 25,000 subscribers, and I analyze literature there. A lot of it's college literature because it started out for my students, but now I'm adding all kinds of things. So if that's helpful, you might find something useful there. And then my website, I'm going to switch over and show you one thing from the website, if I can figure out how to do that. It is a discussion guide that has been made by Chronicle. They hired Cindy Rodriguez, who is also an author, to make a little discussion guide. And it's free, it's on my website, and it includes a lot of good kinds of questions that I think students are curious about. And I was pleased with her work. I especially like the question about, one is about the title, and why do you think this is an appropriate title? But one of my favorite questions is about Zuri's British accent, and why is it that the British accent has a flavor of specialness and fanciness, and yet the Hispanic accent, like Quijana's father, does not have those associations at all. And asking kids to think about, do they have an accent of some kind, or dialects around the country? Southerners speak a little differently, have different words for things. The New York Times has that dialect quiz. You might have seen it. Like, do you call it a lightning bug or do you call it a firefly? So a discussion of accents could even, go beyond just accents. And that's just one of my favorite questions that she picked up on. Okay, but I don't want to, there we go. I don't want to dominate the whole evening. I want to give you all chances to ask questions. So please do.
Yeah, I posted thank you so much, Rebecca. That was so cool to see pictures of family, of when people grow up. Pictures are so impactful. Show time. I posted the link for the discussion guide, and the New Orleans crew has this Google document with an ongoing list of discussion questions. So So you all, instead of sharing that link, if you guys want to use that to ask questions, you can type it into the chat box. Rebecca, I thought I would start with a question which is not specifically related to the book, but more a question I'm trying to ask overall to different authors, because it's the use of the word, and you use the word Latino, but on your website, and just kind of the trend these days is to use the word Latinx, right? And so Colleen and I, our I've brought this discussion up to our staff at the Center for Latin American Studies, the faculty, the Spanish faculty are opposed to it. Although those that are in literature and in theater, oh yes, Latinx is what we should be using. And then me working with, learning about children's books and publishers, all the publishers use Latinx. What is what do you feel about this new word Latinx? Is that something you embrace?
I do. I like it. It's more inclusive. Of course, I guess it's not truly a Spanish word because it doesn't end in O or A. So that I can see why folks are uncomfortable with it, but it does include the non-binary person. It, involves the whole LGBTQ community that way. And it doesn't roll off the tongue, I guess. I wish, it maybe sounded better. And I've heard Latinx and then Latinx. So I think Spanish speakers will say Latinx and then English speakers will say Latinx. But I'm happy with it. Some people are not, and some Spanish speakers are not, as you were pointing out. But I think if we can be inclusive, we should. And I mean, does that mean we need to change the entire, Spanish language, and then we would also change all the Romance languages? Like, that's obviously not practical. But using a term to include as many people as possible is, I think, good.
So did you end up having to, is that something you were familiar with before writing the book? Is that something that you've,
Yeah, I'm in communication with other authors who, have this heritage, and they refer to themselves as Latinx, and they refer to their characters as Latinx. So I guess I can't remember when it came into my consciousness. Not very long ago. I mean, maybe 3 years ago, 2 years ago. It seems to have really taken off recently, but it was within use in my circles of authors and Latinx authors, kind of when I started writing and communicating with them. So
yeah. Great. I see there's a question from Lauren. Did you want to ask it? Lauren Jurek?
Yes. Can you hear me?
yes.
So my question is, obviously you shared that a lot of the inspiration of the story and the characters came from your own life, but a lot of the book it seems to be set in a contemporary time. So how did you adapt the childhood experiences that you had to more contemporary context for your readers?
Yeah, I am a mother of, my kids are now in their 20s, but I really look to them to remind me like what kids are saying now and doing now, and the technology of now. I think the technology, and Colleen mentioned this earlier to me before, that the text messaging and the emojis make it feel very contemporary. And I guess when I was writing, that was actually a hard thing, because I wrote it at first without a Skyping grandmother. She just called Quijana on the phone. So that was actually a change made in one of those 7 revisions to bring it up to date. And I looked to my own cell phone use and like the difference between a period and an exclamation point, and does it sound too severe if you're not sprinkling exclamation points everywhere, things like that. So I did have to kind of retrofit, like put it in there, because when I first wrote, I just wasn't thinking about the time, and I kind of unconsciously set it in my own childhood time. And it doesn't really need to happen in 1983. It should be then, and it's so much more relatable and fresh, contemporary. So one of the big changes I made was adding the technology, and I hope it comes across as now, and 10 years from now it'll probably feel kind of dated, but that's okay. Mm-hmm.
And
What
Diane?
Thank you. Rebecca, it is a pleasure to meet you. We all decided, that was in the group last week. It was like eating an ice cream cone, but I kept eating the ice cream. I couldn't stop. So it went very quickly, and I appreciate the book. Thank you so much. And I also appreciated that question that was just asked, because so much is done with the kids with Instagram now. We don't even know what they're talking about. So I appreciated everything you put in with that. But my question was, I got such a kick out of all your philosophical comments and quoting from Don Quixote, but not even the Don Quixote ones. It was just things that were handed down from your family. And I don't remember the quote, but the one about the shoemaker, for example,
Yes.
and the child that has no shoes. And then the other one I just loved was about the splinter from the tree. It's not the acorn from the tree, it was the splinter. So where did those come from?
So those are phrases that my dad uses, and he's not alone. Like if you Google, sayings or cliches in Spanish, these are sayings that are pretty common. And they were in my head because of my dad. But when I went to kind of research and make sure I had it correct, I saw them out there. And there are so many. But those are fun, yes.
Great.
Yeah. And the Don Quixote, my dad really is the kind of person in real life who, just starts quoting a poem, just walks in the living room and starts, reciting a poem. And, when I was a kid, he would say, now listen to that metaphor. Isn't that amazing? And so I think that's why I was drawn to poetry, and why there's a lot of figurative language in the book. And probably that, if I were teaching the book, I would probably point to some of the figurative language too, and talk about how does a metaphor work, and how, what kinds of qualities are transferred from the object to the vehicle and the tenor. Okay, but the two things that are being compared, how do they talk to each other? But back to Don Quixote, I watched Don Quixote, the movie, The Man of La Mancha, with Peter O'Toole and Sophia Loren and all this, when I was way too young to understand it. But all my life, I knew the concept, the idealism of Quixote, and the sense that he had this lost cause, but that it didn't matter to him. Like he, what mattered to him was trying. And that's a message that Quijana has to grapple with, learn, at first reject. Spain's most famous loser is not who she wants to be named after. But she does start to understand that there are things worth doing regardless of the results. Yeah, and that's very much from my dad and his, he quoted Ortega y Gasset. And again, for the book, I did a little Googling to make sure I was getting it right. But I really owe a lot to my parents, who are teachers. They're both, they're retired teachers. They taught English as a second language, as it was called, in Texas in their time. But they both taught high school and also middle school for a while. So it was a very bookish upbringing for me.
It looks like Mary Alice has a question.
Hi. So I teach EL, we call it EL in Tennessee, and at McGavick. And I thought that Quijana's experience in her Spanish class, and just that whole, like, how she's constantly, the people assume what she knows or doesn't know about her heritage and her language, was very relevant, because I have a lot of students that come in that maybe speak dialects or only know partial of their languages, maybe aren't literate, and there's a lot of assumptions even in how they're scheduled. Like, they'll get put in Spanish classes with higher Spanish classes with the assumption they can write. Anyway, that's a ball game. But I think that from in our book club that we've really seen how this theme of, like, whether kids, like, a huge focus on their Spanish or a huge focus on their English, and the consequences really of not knowing both, I think, for the child. But anyway, do you agree with Quijana's parents' decision to not really focus on her Spanish growing up, or was that an experience of yours, or and just explaining that?
Yeah, sadly, tragically, my parents did not teach me Espanol, and they feel really bad about it now. So when I wrote this, I made Quijana much more like myself. And I actually had to invent a good reason that her parents had not already taught her Spanish, because I hope that now people understand the benefits of being bilingual and the brain connections you have built when you speak more than one language, multilingual even. I hope that people are, giving their children that gift of the bilingual. But I know that even my cousins who maybe were born in Guatemala, but have lived in the United States most of their lives, their level of Spanish is not an academic level or a literary level. They tend not to read literature in Spanish. It is a conversational only, and like you're saying, they may not have ever truly, written it much. So there's a lot of, like, diversity in the diversity there. But it's sad not to be bilingual, and it's a gift if you are. And my college classes brought me closer, but I don't think I will ever conjugate easily. I guess ever is a long time, but I will always have trouble with humor. The same thing my dad has trouble with in English. Like, he does not understand birthday cards. Yeah, like, the cards go around and everyone laughs at the card, and he looks at it and he thinks, okay, because humor is just really cultural specific, and that's like, I'm not going to get there. Even if I do Duolingo all day long, I'm not going to get there. But I hope our students will value and celebrate multiple languages, and try to speak them and preserve it as much as possible. Yeah. Please. You know what? I'll add a little story. The fact that Quijana is unable to understand her abuela is right from my life. When my grandparents visited from Guatemala, they flew all the way from there to Texas, and there I was standing in the living room, unable to talk to them. And my abuelo in particular had a reputation of being very funny and even being able to do voices. And like I said, humor is the thing. There was no hope that I would understand him. And so, they never really talked to me. And, people tried to translate a little bit, but pretty soon you're just lost in the dust, and it's too much trouble to translate every single thing. And I just could never share who I really was with them, nor could they with me. And so that barrier, they've passed now, and I just did not know them. So.
It looks like Lauren states that she really likes the part when Quijana's dad says, "We aren't out of the forest yet," and either Quijana or her mom says, "It's woods, not forest."
Yes.
These expressions are really funny.
Yeah, it is fun to like say the saying. And actually, my dad doesn't missay the sayings in real life too much, but I thought it would be fun if the character did. And I know other people in my life who tend to say, they always say it a little wrong, and it's funny. And so I tried to put some humor in the book. I don't think I'm a very funny person by nature. Like, I'm not comedic, I don't think. But I feel like a book for kids should have some light moments and have some humor. Yeah. Yeah.
And Haley has a question. Haley, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, it's so great to have you here. I was so excited for this. It's awesome. One of the things I loved about the book was all the different threads or all the different sort of disciplines that are interwoven throughout it. You've got science, specifically biology, earth science. There's multiple languages, whether it be the language of music or the Spanish language, and even like texting and texting lingo. There's just so many different threads going through it. And I was wondering which of those was the most challenging for you to write or to bring in as you were revising?
That's an interesting question. The science came in later. I won't say that it was hard exactly, but it did take a lot of research. I mean, it took time. I wanted Grandma Miller to have a career and have a field. And my own grandmother, she would have had to be a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher. And she was a teacher also, family of teachers. But a grandmother now could be my age, almost. And so I wanted to make sure that she had an interesting background, and that she, she has all this wisdom that she gives to Quijana. Don't let fear narrow your life, and make your day amazing. And I felt like that wisdom had to be from experience and not just sort of platitudes thrown out there. But I definitely didn't want it to sound preachy to kids, readers. So by giving her this science background, she could be a pretty hip grandma, and she could also refer to the natural world for some of these bits of wisdom, like the gopher turtle and the eagles, and different animals had qualities, or their life habits would give Grandma Miller a reason to tell Quijana, look at this animal, they know about life, and so here's some wisdom for you. And that was added later on, because in the original version, Grandma Miller died in chapter 3, which would have been terrible. I thought that her death was an important moment for Quijana, which it is, but early on my agent said, I just like this character. Can you let her live a while? Give her more airtime, give her more time, so that when we lose her, we'll feel the loss more. So we added in that. I mean, I decided, okay, let's extend her life, and then I had to create a life for her, and that was kind of hard in revision by that time, to kind of put that all in there after building the whole rest of the book. I had to add, insert. So, yeah. Oh, you mentioned
Glory.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll add this real quickly. You mentioned music, and I happen to have show and tell. This is my father's guitar.
Oh.
And it's so worn that the frets have where his fingers have been on it. It's here for another reason, but I did grow up with a lot of music, and I'm really glad I did, and being in choir and everything was something from real life that I could put in Quijana's life. That was one of the sweeter things about her life, I think, that not so much a struggle for her. Just singing is a a healing, uplifting experience. And that's true for me too.
I was curious about this next question myself. Gloria asks, Gloria, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, I'm sharing it. She goes like Crystal, I'm Maria. So we're calling in from Nashville. Thank you so much for joining in. I'm half Guatemalan and half Bolivian. So I'm first generation. I grew up speaking Spanish. So I kind of related with Quijana in the last few pages. I mean, throughout the whole book, but I just it was just so beautifully put whenever she first saw her parent, like her grandma, and kind of seeing it where she was like all her nervousness went away and she like kind of felt like just the human connection. And I was just curious to hear like firsthand your experience, or like what led you to like have such a beautiful passage, because like I honestly I feel like I cry a lot, but but it reminded me the first time that I went to Bolivia for the first time at 10 years old, and my grandma, she didn't speak Spanish, but the indigenous language. So I kind of felt the same thing where I couldn't speak to her, and I was nervous, like, especially in Bolivia, they wear a lot of the cultural garments. So I was like, oh, I don't know anyone. Like, how am I going to like talk to my grandma? How am I going to do this? But then as soon as like I saw her, it just all went away. But so it was just so beautifully put. So I wanted to like thank you for that, because it definitely felt good to at least have a shared connection with someone.
Thank you for saying so. That was one of my favorite scenes to write, because it was so warm, you know, and that is how I felt visiting Guatemala. I was there at age 5, and then again as a teenager, really an older teenager, maybe 17, 18, and then again in 2007. So I was in my 30s and I had my own kids with me and wanted to show them the country. You know, it was more the mood. It's not really that anything exactly like that happened in my life, but there were gatherings, of course, and there were, you know, fruit and food and music and dancing, and the whole atmosphere was so warm and so welcoming, and everybody was just happy that we were there, or when I was younger, you know, that I was there. And I was actually kind of fawned over as the little American girl, you know. And nobody cared if I could speak or not. They just hugged on me and loved me. And that undercurrent of love is, you know, comes from life. And I kept trying to channel that. As I was writing that scene, and just the atmosphere of everyone gathered together, and how important family is, and just everybody loving each other, and, you know, looking past all of our imperfections, and, you know, just wanting everyone to feel like they belong. Yeah, I'm glad. It's fun to hear about your background too. How interesting. Yes.
Emily Bauman. Emily's asked a question. Emily?
Okay, I was curious, and you basically already touched on this a lot, but I was really curious about how much of Quijana's struggle, because she had a lot of struggles and a lot of, you know, that preteen, teenage angst throughout the whole book. And I was really curious as to how much of that was your experience, or maybe you saw it through your kids, or where did that come from?
A lot of that is just real. I think it's, you know, if you survive middle school, you are good to go for so many challenges in life. You know, you're questioning yourself, your place in the world, your own identity. You're figuring out friendships and the crush thing. There's a lot of firsts in the book, like a first crush, death, of course. But the middle schooler mind and the insecurity, I just had to think back to my own childhood for that, because it's I guess it's a pretty universal thing that you know, suddenly you know, you're practicing how to dance in front of the mirror, and then when you're actually at the dance, you you might never dance at all because you just don't have the self-confidence yet. So yeah, Quijana does struggle a lot, and a lot of that was from life, but I do think it's sort of universal too, that you know, you have all those questions around who you are. Some things that were some puberty references and chapters and scenes. And I think there was the feeling that girls are more comfortable with all of that now. I don't know. Really? Maybe, I hope so. But I maybe having cut those scenes, I wanted to make sure what was left did show some of the discomfort around that, you know, coming of age and not puberty per se, but growing and leaving childhood behind and figuring out who you are now. You know, how do you, I think it's Grandma Miller who mentions, you know, you need to be who you are. And she says, yeah, but who's that, you know? And she's trying to figure that out. Yeah.
As Barlow says, she loves the wisdom that Quijana, she was always connected with to nature somehow. She was one of my favorite characters.
Oh,
Grandma Miller, Rayanne says Grandma Miller was my favorite character. Meredith states that she loves "Don't let fear narrow your life" is one of my favorite quotes from the book.
Yeah.
Alexandra also likes Grandma Miller's story line, and loss spoke to her.
Yes. And Miller is actually my mother's maiden name. Oh wait, my grandmother's maiden name. So I took a little bit of Grandma Miller from a lot of different people, like a composite, but partly from my real grandma, whose maiden name was Miller. It occurs to me too that that grandma for me was a bit of a writer, not a novel writer, but she invented games for children, and she had a book of games published. And she always had, like at any family gathering, she would have some sort of song or game or rhyme that we were supposed to engage with. And when Quijana writes a poem for her English class, I was kind of thinking about both my grandma and that English teacher, because my grandma always wanted to make learning fun and using games to reach kids. Now she taught PE, so a lot of her games were physical games, but at family gatherings, a lot of them were verbal games. And so I kind of made up the poem thing. It wasn't an assignment I got as a kid. But it is an assignment I have tried out on my students, where Galway Cannell has a poem called Eating Blackberries, yes. And then the students are supposed to write their own version of this poem, but not with blackberries, you know, with pizza or with watermelon. And Quijana, of course, writes her poem, and it's in the back of the book, which, you know, of course I wrote, which is sort of weird. But yeah, my grandmother really loved games and language play like that. Yeah.
Looks like the next question is from Roxy. Roxy, do you want to ask your question? I can also read it. Roxy, are you there? Roxy.
Yeah. Full disclosure, can you hear me? Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
You're all frozen. Okay.
You're cutting in. I can ask the question.
Thank
Should I
you
ask
for
it?
including me. I'm not Roxy. My daughter's Roxy. I can't figure it out. Come back. Yes.
So why don't I ask the question? I can't really hear you. Can anyone? I don't think anyone can hear you. It's cutting in and out. So all right, I'm going to ask the question if that's okay. So Rebecca, she asks, can you speak to any differences you have observed in the understanding treatment of ASD in Latinx families versus non-Latinx?
Wow,
Yes,
what a good
please.
question.
Thank you.
I think the Latinx families I know are struggling very similarly to any family with autism spectrum situation. In my own family, my husband, the dad of my kids, is not Latinx, and so our family is sort of like even more, like my boys are like 1/4. And so I wonder, I probably am not able to speak to this real clearly because I feel like it's mostly hearsay, just folks anecdotally. But I worry about the stigma in general. I notice that the Latinx community is, not comfortable with getting tested and having their kids kind of subjected to any kind of labeling, and everyone worries about those things. But I think maybe there's a reluctance and a stigma around not just autism, but mental health issues and lots, the whole kind of just asking for help at all. And I think it's tough it's not just the Latinx community that has that, but I have noticed that, it's hard for a father, maybe in particular, to admit that their child needs some kind of help or has a difference. And again, is it easy for any father? No. But I think culturally, there's some pride that gets in the way there. And I hope I'm not going to get in trouble for saying that, but it just anecdotally, I have seen that it's hard. Yeah. So, yeah.
There's some comments. Erica's talking about how her connection to Puerto Rico is similar. The disconnect because of language barriers, so much love and warmth. The balance is beautifully put in your book. Thank you.
Oh.
The next question is from Sasha, Sasha's grandma. Sasha, do you want to ask it?
Hi, I have a question for you as an educator and for anyone else who wants to chime in. I just finished my first year teaching. I've obviously had a lot of time to reflect these 8 weeks. And I just remember the part where Quijana's so relieved that her teacher pronounces her name right. And I just am thinking about all the times that I've absolutely butchered my students' names. And it's like, I want to be forgiving of myself. And I know people were putting advice in the chat, having them introduce themselves. But sometimes if you tell a 7th grader to stand up on the first day, that can be like another terrifying thing. And it's just, if anyone has any advice or anything that can help me when I enter into my 2nd year, awesome, because I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. Your first day of 7th grade, as we read, is scary enough. So
that is so true. And I did forgive my teachers for messing up my name. Now Rebecca's easy, but when I was a kid, I went by Becky, and it was spelled Bequi. So no teacher ever guessed that that's what it was. And I didn't expect anyone to pronounce Balcárcel correctly, even Spanish speakers. So, there is a lot of grace. At the same time, I like the person who said, let them introduce themselves. In a college classroom, they stay seated and I just ask them, tell me who you are. And it also helps with the pronoun question. If they'll introduce themselves, then often the student will also say, and I prefer them and they instead of she or he. And sometimes I'm flubbing that up as well. And that's another thing that I don't want to flub up, but I have, and students are forgiving, thankfully. But the pronunciation is really, Yeah, I struggle. You know, that we have a lot of Middle Eastern names, a lot of, in Texas, we have a large community of Vietnamese, and I need them to help me. And anyone else can add?
There's lots of ideas here in the chat, which are really great. Mary Cruz says she loves doing icebreakers with names and a movement. They would break it down to teach others and then have a moment associated with it. I go first and always am silly. I've done that.
It's a great one. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And icebreakers, they're good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
The icebreaker idea.
Thank you.
Yeah. One thing, as a teacher, I have trouble getting students to read novels because now if it's read aloud to them, and some of you may be able to do that, it's one thing, but a lot of students will, as you know, try to read about the book instead of reading the book. And it may be more of a problem with classic books where there's a lot of material out there online. But I try to get around that by having them do something creative, like write a letter from one character to another. You know, like what if Quijana could write in Spanish? What would she write to her abuela? Or what would she write to her dad after the guitar breaks? You know, if she were going to write an apology. So like a not cheatable question, you know, that they have to actually think and create in their response. Instead of like a worksheet where they're just filling in facts. Yeah.
Are there other questions? I have some others generated by the group, but are there other questions based off of our discussion so far? Where we have a few more minutes, so I don't want to take it up. Well, so I will ask one of the questions that I think that I'm interested as well. One of our members in the group said that they saw that on Twitter you are revising a new middle grades novel. What makes you interested in the middle grades, and would you like to tell us a little bit about your new novel?
I'd love to, yes. So middle graders are just at that age of so much discovery, and I find that it's really just fun to write about them. They're learning about themselves, they're learning about the world. They're becoming aware of some things outside of just family, even outside of school. You know, their world is getting bigger, and it's just interesting to be in that brain. At the same time, they have fresh eyes, and I like that. So, and deep feelings, as we were saying, you know, very intense feelings. So it's actually really fun to write about. And my new book, the main character is again bicultural, and her name is Luz, L-U-Z, partly because I'm ready for one syllable now. I don't know. And this is my list of chapters, which I know it just probably just looks like a yellow blob, but when I write, I mean, I have a big brainstorming session, thinking in particular, what is this character, what do they want and what do they need? And how are those two things different? So Luz, in the new book, she wants to leave behind her soccer playing identity because she got a sports injury, so she can no longer be a soccer star. And she wants to learn about computer programming. And she is very excited to learn about robots and be in the robotics class, but the teacher won't let her in that class unless she can prove that she's ready for that class. It's actually an advanced class. So what she wants is to learn enough programming to get into that class. But what she needs is to stop proving herself so that she can be loved. So she thinks that it's her achievement that makes her important and lovable, and being a star on the soccer field, you know, making her parents cheer for her. It's all about, can she score the goal? Can she impress her parents? And with computer programming, she wants to do the same thing, like, watch, I can be really good at this. But ultimately she has to learn that she's enough. Just like she doesn't have to do all of that to earn love. She is lovable. And then probably the most important other element in that book will be that she has a half sister who was born in Guatemala, whose mother has died and therefore comes to live with Luz and her family in the United States. And this is also based on a real life situation. I do have a half sister and she lives in Guatemala, but I didn't know about her until she was in her 40s and I was in my 30s. And my dad didn't know she existed either until, about 2004. So I thought it would be really fun for a character to have the half-sister element, but bring her in at age, I think Luz is 11 and the half-sister will be 13 so that they can go to the same school. But that'll be a very upsetting thing. I mean, if you can kind of imagine Quijana having to deal with that, it's kind of similar. Yeah. And I wanted to do a STEM-y book, and I love, let's also include STEAM, we love the arts, of course. But I love science too, and I like computer programming, and so I have relatives who do that, and so I wanted to have a book that was, kind of different.
So when can we expect that? When will that be out?
It did sell. Here's the rough draft. Yay, thank you. So Chronicle expects it to be out in spring of 2022. And that feels far away, but they have to, we'll have an editorial process from now till about October, and then they'll do a cover and the ARCs, the advanced review copies will go out, and maybe the virus will have settled down by then and I can do book signings and stuff like that. So at first 22 seemed so far away, but now I'm kind of glad. I think it'll be good timing,
Perfect timing.
This crisis. Yeah.
Well, we are at the end of our time. I know there may be other questions. There's been some responses to the pronouncing names, Sasha, for you and others that are interested in some advice. So we did record this. I saw no no's, so I recorded this, and the chat will be available if you want to check on some of these notes. Is there any last thing, Colleen, that you want to do?
I would love to take a picture.
Oh, yeah.
If you have your book within arm's reach, if you could just hold it up, we'll add some color to our Zoom call. I feel like all the Zoom photos are looking the same. So, that looks so cool, you guys. Okay, I'm going to count to 3 and smile. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Awesome. Just going to take a screenshot and I'll send it to Denise if she wants to share with her folks as well. Yes, and of course Rebecca will share with you.
Well, and all of you, I'd be happy to, do something like this for your class. Maybe rather short, and I usually charge for things, but if it's like a 10-minute thing with your class, then that would be free. So I'd love to meet your students.
Thank you so much. That's incredibly generous, Rebecca. Thank you. On behalf of the whole group. All right, everyone, stay safe. Keep reading. You'll get new books from your respective Denise colleagues next month, and enjoy your summer of reading. Thanks again, Rebecca. This has been wonderful.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
It's a pleasure. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.